Good morning and welcome to our third and final program on legal resources for public librarians or non-law librarians. Our presenter for all three programs has been and still is Deborah Person, Associate Law Librarian at the University of Wyoming College of Law Library. I'll hand it over to Deb in just one moment here. Just a reminder that all three programs will be archived at the Wyoming State Library website, and I will be sending that out. That'll happen either later today or early tomorrow. And I think that's the only announcement that I have. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Deb. Today's program is on statutes and regulations.
And as Sarah has said, welcome to everybody, and welcome back to those of you who are joining us again for the final of our three sessions. Today we're going to talk about statutes and regulations, so let's go ahead and start talking. Statutes generally are the tools that we use when somebody walks in our door and says, I need the law on. Then we usually think first thing about taking them to our sets of statutes, and that's a very good choice. I just want to remind everybody, as we've talked about for the last 2 days, that all three branches of government make law, so that if we're not finding something that we expect to find in the statutes, it doesn't mean that the law doesn't exist. It just means we might have to resort to some of the other resources that we're talking about in these sessions. We've already talked about the court decisions, and we'll talk later today about agency regulations that come out of the executive branch. But since we're talking about statutes now, let's kind of define them. These are obviously the laws that are passed by the legislative branch. The laws that are passed are accumulated and bound into the current laws of the state or the country. And then these statute sets include the constitutions for their jurisdiction and for the general government generally, the federal government, did I say general? And they also include court rules for their own jurisdiction. So they have a lot of content even just within the sets of statutes themselves. I want to talk about the process of lawmaking. This is a really quick review, but it's not that I think maybe any of us particularly need the process, but I do want to remind people that in many of the steps of the process, there's documentation that is produced. So if for some reason, and this isn't unlikely for a patron coming to a law library, I don't know the kind of patron questions that you get, how many people are looking for the history of a piece of legislation, but these documentations that are produced, it's nice to know they're available and where you can access them within the process. And so this link right here is specific to the Wyoming legislative process and how to find those documents that are produced. I'm not going to go there, but you do have some access to that if somebody comes and asks you for history of a statute. So in the process of lawmaking, we start with a bill that's introduced into one house of Congress by a legislator. The bill is assigned to a committee, and the committee then reviews the bill. They can research it, they can hold hearings, they can make changes to it, they can ignore it, in which case it dies in committee. When they've decided that they have it in a format that they would like to move forward, the committee then reports the bill out to the floor of the legislature, where it is read to all of the representatives and voted on. If it's passed, it's sent to the other house. If you have a two-house legislature, it's sent to the other house for similar treatment. If the other house isn't going to pass it in the form that it's come to them, they may amend it. You may have interactions between the houses. You might have a conference committee that develops in order to iron out the differences between the two houses, and eventually you may have it passed by both houses and sent to the executive, in which case the governor or the president has the option to sign it into law or to veto it or to leave it unsigned, in which case it becomes law after a certain period of time. So that's the process of legislation. After that process is completed, you'll find, and here I'm referencing Wyoming specifically, you'll find these laws that have been passed, the public laws, compiled into the Wyoming session laws. The laws are passed, this encompasses the laws that are passed in one legislative session, and they're arranged generally in the order in which they're signed by the governor. And ultimately then, at the end of the legislative session, they're organized by subject or codified and entered into a set of Wyoming statutes. In our case, probably the Wyoming statutes annotated, but whichever set is available. Right. So let's talk about the Wyoming statutes annotated. What these are published by Lexis, this particular set of annotated statutes, and they are the current general laws of our state. In addition to the text of the laws, they include cites to cases that are interpreting the statutes. That's why they're an annotated set of statutes, because they include annotations to the case law. They're available in paper and electronically. I'm assuming that all of you have this set in your library, because it's only, 12 or 13 volumes, and it's a vital piece of library collection. So I'm sure you have it available and recognize it, and you've probably used it many, many times. The whole set is republished every 2 years after the general legislative session. In Wyoming, the odd years of our legislative sessions are what we call general legislative sessions, where they handle all issues of general legislation. The even years are our budget session, where they're handling primarily budget issues. There are some other topics that come up that they handle, but generally those are budget issues. And therefore, because the legislation that comes out of those sessions is more limited, the results of the even number years are published into a single volume supplement that supplements the odd years publication. So you have your 2009 publication of the whole set, your 2010 supplement, and then again in 2011 now, since we had our general session, we'll have a republication of the whole set. I want to look at these statutes that are available online. The best place to go for these is the Wyoming Legislative Service Office. In fact, that's the best place to go for any legislative questions you have about current legislation, archive legislation, and access to the statutes, along with such things as how do I contact my local representative, how do I appear at committee hearings, those kinds of things. Just quickly before I do that, I want to make reference to Cornell's Legal Information Institute and Washlaw, both sites that we've already visited, but just if you're looking for statutes from other states, these sites collect the links to those statutes, and it's a good place to start instead of trying to perform your own Google search for them. Not that that would be a bad way to find them, because they're mostly generally available online for you. So this is the website for the Legislative Service Office, and you can see I have a lot of links on the left here that'll direct me to a lot of the content, all of the content that's on the LSO site. I also would have the ability to get in the text-only statutes right here by following these links. But what I'm really interested in are the Wyoming statutes annotated. And I just want to stress again, it is not many states who have been allowed to put their statutes, annotated sets of statutes, freely available on the internet, because this is published by a commercial publisher, and they basically made all their information available. This is a huge boon for us. You won't find these for all states. So I'm going to go into the Wyoming statutes annotated. I'm showing this, you probably are familiar with this website. If not, it's really nice if you get a phone call from somebody who's trying to get some legal information, you have a place to direct them quickly and easily. Once I come into the resource here, I need to click on the Wyoming Code folder, and that'll open up the basic table of contents for the Wyoming statutes for me. And as I scroll down, I see that the Wyoming statutes are broken down into 42 titles by subject, and I have a general index that I can search if I want to. But I just want to go into one of these by way of example. So I'm going to choose Title 2, which is wills. And within Title 2, see if I'll go into Chapter 5, Rights of Surviving Spouses. So I'm in Title 2, Wills, Chapter 5, Rights of Surviving Spouses. And I'm just going to look at elective shares of property, Section 101. See? So Title 2, Chapter 5, Section 101 this is the hierarchy of my statute that I'm looking at currently. Now, within this statute, my sections or subsections A through D are the actual text of my statute, right here. Below that, I have a reference to the historical information of my statute. This is telling me that this statute was passed in 1979, and that I can find that in the Wyoming session laws. If I want to read that statute as it was in 1979, I would go to Session Laws 1979, Chapter 142, Section 1, and I could read that. Then I have a semicolon, which separates that information from the next amendment to the statute. So this statute was amended in 1980. I can go to the Session Laws of 1980, Chapter 54, Section 1, and see what happened that year. It was also amended in 2004. That was our last amendment to this statute, and I can go and read those changes as well. That's just historical information of the statute. In most cases you don't need it, but in some instances it's really helpful to have that. I also have content here that is telling me about the piece of legislation. It tells me what happened with the 2004 amendment. This may or may not be complete. The amendment might have been as short as this, but I might want to go and look at it to see if there's any other content there. It also tells me of conflicting legislation. Here's, though, the part that I was referring to when I said this becomes an invaluable tool. And these are the case annotations, that is, the cases that have interpreted the statute. I can tell because as I'm looking at the site below here, Reno v. Reno, I'm seeing a case citation citing me to a Wyoming court decision right here. And this is telling me how our Wyoming courts have interpreted this particular statute on the issue of special power of appointment. I also have a case, Connolly, which has also cited, it hasn't necessarily interpreted the statute, but it did cite this statute. If I wanted to do a comprehensive search of case law and statutes, I've got my start right here, and I can go and read those cases and see how they were using my statute. In addition to that, and I think this is helpful from the perspective of a patron who's not familiar with resources, I also have cross-references, links to secondary sources here. It's referring me to AmJur Second and CJS, both of which are legal encyclopedias that we talked about the other day. It's also referring me to ALRs, which are American Law Reports, also a secondary source specific to case law. So I have a lot of material that's here that I would be able to access for somebody who wanted some more general information on this particular topic. And these are just copies, screen captures of what we had just looked at. Looking at federal statutes, though, obviously, again, we're talking about laws that are passed by the United States Congress. These laws are passed in each legislative session, and they're combined into a set that's called United States Statutes at Large. And this is going to be a chronological publication very similar to our state session laws that we just discussed. Eventually, they're codified and incorporated into a collection of federal statutes known as the United States Code. And just as an aside note, when we say something is codified, it's actually indicating a subject arrangement. So if we have code within a title, as in United States Code, or the Code of Federal Regulations that we'll look at later, that should tell us that we're looking at a subject arrangement of something. If you've been with us for 3 days, then you've probably grasped the notion that legal resources appear in two main formats. There's usually a chronological publication of something and then a subject access to that. And as a researcher, generally what we're using is the subject access, but we do with regularity refer to the chronological publications as well. So the United States Code is organized into 50 titles, all different subjects, and it's published every 6 years with annual supplements. Now, it's a government publication, should come free generally, but it is slower. It doesn't come out with the speed that a commercial publication would come out. So I think that our most recent compilation, in terms of the 6-year compilation, our most recent is the 2006. But I believe that the most recent annual supplement that's come out is the 2009. So we're a couple of years behind in that publication. There are ways to update the information that you have in the public paper publications with some online resources, and we'll kind of take a look at a couple of those. Just to remind you how a citation looks for the United States Code, you'll see a reference to the title number, the abbreviation for the code, and the section number. So 18 U.S.C. Section 485 is referring us to Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 485. other commercial publications of the United States Code. It's United States Code Annotated, that's published by Thomson West, and United States Code Service, that's published by LexisNexis. These are not generally freely available on the internet, but they are the tools that legal researchers use rather than using the United States Code. These sets include not only the content of the code, but they also include legislative information and case annotations similar to what the state statutes include, along with cross-references to federal regulations and a lot of other secondary sources. In fact, I've been a member of a number of listservs where people who do legal research all day long have said that the number one resource that they use are annotated sets of United States Code. So they're a really valuable resource, and I'm assuming, unfortunately, that most of you might not have this particular publication in your library, but we do have the United States Code and ways to work with that. So let's take a look at some of the online sources we have for the United States Code. This is a sample page from GPO's Federal Digital System, which replaces the GPO Access. And I just want to go in here for a minute and run a couple searches. You, again, may be more familiar with this website than I am, but I'll just show you the things that I thought were interesting about this website. At this website, I can access a lot of different federal databases here. I want to search the United States Code. I can link to it from there, but I'm going to go through the advanced search feature. And as I go in here, I can actually choose any of these collections, but since government publications seem to be so voluminous, I get a lot more results than actually are helpful to me. So I'm going to try and cut that down a little bit, since I know what I want is a federal statute. And I'm going to search, put in my full text searching for grazing rights here. I have to click my search button. And this is going to bring up 1,351 results. That is a lot of information on just grazing rights. But you know, I don't need grazing rights for everything. I just want to look at those within Wyoming, the federal laws that apply to grazing rights within Wyoming. So I'm going to click on this within results, and I'm going to apply my term, Wyoming, get the correct spelling of that, and see what happens now. That's reduced my number to 82. And I'm sorting here by relevance. What I can do over here is I can see what dates these hits resulted from. I have 6 hits that resulted from 2009, which, as I said, is probably the most current in the federal U.S. Code. But a number of them that all lead up to this particular date. I can just look at those 6 hits if I want. I can do that by clicking on this Search Only Recent Editions link right here, or by clicking on my 2009 link over here. You don't always want the most current, but you do want to know what your currency is when you're looking at them. What I like those, we have a line of facets over here on the left, which allow us to search by a variety of other topics and breaks us out into things that we maybe didn't think of. I'm scrolling down here to the United States Code content, because this is telling me that 48 of my results are dealing with Title 16 conservation, which is interesting to me. I also have 16 results under Indian law and 16 results under public lands law. And then I can also break that out into more. So there's a lot of stuff here in the left columns that are going to help me out too, to refine my searches a little bit. I have other options for searching things electronically. I can search at FindLaw. I have to say that in the past, FindLaw was one of my #1 sources for helping patrons, especially on the phone, because findlaw.com is such an easy URL to direct people to when you want to help them, searching something. I'm finding it less and less useful. It still has a good search engine for searching United States Code information. I can no longer tell the currency of a statute when I go in there. I used to be able to. I don't know if they have it covered with advertising now or what. The information still says I can find it, but I'm not finding it on the pages. Maybe it was just recently. Maybe it'll come back, but I'm finding that less useful now. Both FindLaw and Cornell give me access to the United States Constitution, and I am going to go into Cornell for just a minute. And previously, I used to have I used to be able to go into the federal Constitution and I would find the articles and the amendments to the Constitution, and then in both of these sites I would find annotations, that is, cases that are interpreting the Constitution. It was great. It was a great resource. They've replaced that. They're still calling them annotations, but they've replaced it with sort of more of an essay, and the annotations are now in the footnotes. That's less helpful to me as a legal researcher, but it might prove to be more helpful to the general public because it gives more explanation and it's less legal and it provides more context. So while I don't like it, I think you might find a possible use for it for somebody who walks in the door and doesn't understand what they're talking about, but wants cites to some of these sources. I'm going to go into the United States Code here. I'm in Cornell again, Legal Information Institute, which is their legal portal. And within Cornell site, I have opportunities to search by the titles, that is browse, search, or enter my title and section number, but I'm going to go into the search engine, which is the keyword searching capabilities. This is, my searching here is working 1 out of 3 times today, so let's see if it's going to take me or if it's going to throw me out. I'm looking for grazing rights here, the same thing I looked at before. I'm going to give this one more try. Because what I have in here that I'm not getting in Find Law, okay, I'll give it 2 more tries, is that it's giving me, doggone it, there's a link when I bring up that text that says, how current is this? And if I follow that link, it'll tell me the date of currency, and it will also give me instructions on how to update it. And that's what I wanted to show you, but you can find that yourself as time allows. It's nice. Currency is an issue with statutes. You want to know the statute that was in force at the time that an event occurred. And if somebody just walks in the door and wants to know what's the law now on this issue, that's one thing. But if their issue occurred 2 or 3 years ago, you don't know whether the current statute that they're finding is the statute that applies. So it's nice to be able to recognize and easily search the currency of the statute. Cornell actually is just a front for the information that's at the U.S. House of Representatives. The U.S. House of Representatives is the entity that's responsible for making the United States Code available. So they're responsible for the publication of the paper copy, and also they make the online copy available. You can also go to their website. I think it's a little less user-friendly, but if you go to the About link, it will tell you how to use their page and how to update the information. But I usually go to Cornell because I think it's more clear from a user perspective how to do the things you need to do. Excuse me. And Thomas I put here because if you need to follow up on any legislative information, both the new GPO website and Thomas will include a lot of information for doing legislative searching. And so I thought I would include the Thomas website here as well. If you haven't been there, it's a good tool to use, but since I didn't necessarily want to focus on legislative history, I chose not to go and demonstrate what's there, but you might want to take a look at it if you have somebody who's looking for free information readily available on the website. You also, remember, have a lot of those links available on your Go Wild database page as well. So, that's about completing our statute discussion. So just quickly to encapsulate what we talked about, I'd like to say that statutes are laws that are passed by the legislature. They first appear as session laws where they're arranged chronologically, and then they're later broken down into subjects and compiled into the jurisdiction's code. Or at a state level, they may continue to be called statutes. Let me address that just for a minute. When I say they're broken down, what I mean is a statute is not necessarily covering just one issue, like our wills issue. A statute actually can cover a lot of things, especially at a federal level. You might have one statute that deals with railroad employees and government liability and Head Start funding. You could have a number of very different issues all together in one statute. So that'll all be in the statute when it first appears published in the federal statutes at large. But when you break it up by its subject, it's going to go into very different places within the title schema of the United States Code. So you're not looking at the whole statute when you're looking at the code. You're looking at all of the current statutes in force that haven't been repealed So it's a different compilation. Other states that have 100 volumes in their statute collection might break their statutes down into codes by having the family code and the criminal code and the business code, but Wyoming, with only 13 volumes, doesn't tend to do that. It frustrates people who are here coming from other states, because I've had a number of people say, yes, but where are your codes? And I just tell them, hey, this is what there is. I have 13 statutes volumes, and this is what you have to work with. But it's the same thing. It's still a subject arrangement of the information that they need. So you're still giving them the same thing, even though they tend to be frustrated by it. Annotated sets of statutes include cases, cites to case law that are interpreting the statutes, and that's invaluable. They also include their own jurisdiction's constitution and the federal constitution, and in most cases the sets also include volumes of court rules, also very valuable. Currency of the statute is important. You need to know what statute was in effect at the time that's relevant to you or your patron. And cites to the amendments to statutes appear at the end within the legislative history information of each statutory section, in case you need to go back and look at a former statute, the text of the statute as it was before. So, with that said, we're completing statutes and moving on to regulations. The regulations are the law of the executive branch. Now, when we talked the first day, I listed both regulations and executive orders as the law that comes out of the executive branch. I'm not really talking about executive orders too much. It's not very often that somebody comes in the door and wants information on executive orders. If you do need to look for federal executive orders, then Title III of your Code of Federal Regulations is the tool you want to use. At the state level here in Wyoming, executive orders are freely available at the governor's website, so you can reach those easily. But what I'm talking about here is a more voluminous set of laws, and that's regulations that come out of the executive agencies and any administrative agency. And agencies are, just to make this clear, what we're talking about. At a federal level, I begin by thinking about our cabinet. So Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, Department of Treasury, all of those departments are agencies. But then you also have immigration, you have patent and trademark. At a state level, you have workers' compensation, you have Department of Motor Vehicles, the Game and Fish that we already talked about. So all of those entities fall under the oversight of the executive branch, and that's why we consider the regulations that they write as law coming out of the executive branch of government. Regulations are passed by agencies, and the agencies are given the authority to write regulations, usually within a statute that's passed by the legislature. Let's use an example at a federal level of National Environmental Policy Act. This act could be 200 pages. I never went to check, but it could be 200 pages long for all I know. It's a big act, but it still doesn't cover all of the elements that are required for an agency to enforce that particular statute. So what the agency does within, or the legislature does within that act is they say, and we're formulating a new agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, and this agency has the power to write the regulations it needs to enforce this statute. And then the agency comes along and will write volumes of regulations in terms of things that the statute won't cover, like, for instance, really what volume of chemicals in the water becomes harmful, and what is the penalty for industries who continue to pump in spite of the fact that this is against the regulations of the agency. So the agencies are writing the regulations, and then they are also enforcing the regulations. They also have an obligation to put proposed regulations in front of the public, as they have to have a public notice of some sort. They can publish their proposed regulations in various places. They can publish leaflets on them. They can hold town meetings. They have a lot of options in what are considered to be public notification, But they have to put that before the general public so that there is a comment period before the regulation is adopted and goes into effect. In addition to the fact that agencies write regulations and enforce the regulations, there are some agencies that have the power to adjudicate. That is, they have their own court system. An example of this is the Internal Revenue Service and the whole tax court system that accompanies them. An issue goes through the tax court system. If a person finds they still don't feel that they've received proper handling, they can then put it into the regular court system. The workers' compensation here at the state level has its own system of addressing grievances. It goes through administrative law process and then frequently be set into the regular state court system if they don't have what one of the parties believes to be an appropriate response to their issue. So regulations actually, or agencies actually touch on many of the powers that we give to our federal government, but at a limited level. So I guess we should talk about some places that we can access federal regulations, and this actually takes us back to the website we were already at. I'll go there in a minute or two, but first I want to talk about a couple of the publications that you'll see, and it's helpful to know the names of these publications and what they do because you're selecting them when you go to these websites. The Federal Register is where we find the federal agency actions, and it's a daily publication of the actions of the federal agencies. And this will include regulations that are still in their proposal state. And this is how a lot of people keep themselves notified about what's happening at the federal agency level, is by monitoring certain agencies that they're particularly interested in. And that is, may I remind you, the chronological publication of agency materials. The Code of Federal Regulations is then the subject compilation of the current regulations that are in force. It's arranged topically by title. It has 50 titles, just like the United States Code. Most of the titles correspond with the titles of the United States Code, but not all of them. But this is where we would go to access the current regulations in force. There are a couple of websites that we can look at. I have two here, and I like them for different reasons, and frankly, I don't know how long the ECFR website will be around, but we can go back to the system that we already looked at, the FDSYS, FedSys, for a quick look at a regulation. And I always tend to choose, when I'm doing this search, something that's near and dear to my heart, and that is ice cream standards. Because the Department of Agriculture is monitoring what really is ice cream as opposed to ice milk or something else. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to put in my search. And it's, again, a relevance ranking, and I have access to the years that are here. I can see that there are 52 of them a result of a 2010 regulation. Other than that, I mean, I can see when it was passed. This one was passed January 1st, 2008. This one was January 1st, 1999. In my opinion, and here's January 1st, 2010, that doesn't necessarily say to me that January 1st, 2010 is the most recent copy of this particular regulation. It's really nice, and I have the information I need there. Doesn't necessarily say it's as current as the most current that there is. And so I kind of like this other website, the ECFR website, because right off the bat, this is going to tell me how current the information is. This is current as of yesterday, right? As of May 24th, or maybe that's the day before. But anyway, within a couple of days, this is current. And I can search it by browsing my titles, or I can do a Boolean or proximity search. I have a lot of failed searches in this particular database, but I'm getting better about how to enter my information, and I'm finding that the proximity search, by separating out my terms, has seemed to work pretty well for me. And this is telling me, as of May 24th, this is my current regulation right here. So I kind of like this website. But, you'll use whatever's handy to you and whichever you prefer in terms of your own particular searching. Now, those are the federal regulations. We want to talk, of course, about the Wyoming state regulations as well. Wyoming state regulations are made available to us through the Secretary of State's office. By statute, all of the Wyoming departments or agencies are required to submit their regulations to the Secretary of State, who then is in turn required to make them available to the public. There isn't an official publication from the Secretary of State's office in paper, but they do have their rules database available to us for searching. It can be slightly frustrating because it doesn't allow us the opportunity to do a keyword search, but we can select topics that we'd like to look at. Now let's go to adult home care, and I want to look at the current rules and regulations. And as I search, it comes up with one set of regulations, and when I click on the link, it'll take me to a PDF form that has that regulation on it. My way for searching, here's a box here that I can put in a term if I want to look for a particular element within this regulation. But you can see that it is a little limited in terms of keyword, well, certainly in terms of keyword search, but our usage is more limited for this particular database, but it's available, and we can have a place where we can refer people who might want this information and not need to come into the library for it. We also have the Wyoming Government Register, which is also known as WILES, which is similar to the Federal Register. That is, it includes proposed and regular actions of the state agencies. And then we have the Wyoming Code of Rules, which also was formerly WILES Code of Wyoming Rules. It's now published by Lexis, which is a print copy, a multi-volume set of Wyoming agency rules currently in force. So we have both print and online access to Wyoming regulations available to us. That's actually all I was going to cover in terms of statutes and regulations, but because in our earlier session I did bring up, make reference to some other jurisdictions and the law that you would find for those other jurisdictions, I thought this might be a good time to touch on those. Municipal codes or city ordinances are also an element of legal resources that we should remember not to overlook. And in a rural state like Wyoming, it's hard to get your hand on copies of all of the different towns' municipal codes and city charters. But the Wyoming State Library has put together a very nice collection of what they have found available on the internet. And so we do have easy access to these states, these cities. They're not necessarily going to link directly to the city code, though they try to link to the city ordinances or the city code. But some of them will just link to the city, and then you go searching on that page for where they have hosted their own city code. But this is really nice, and this is the deepest collection for Wyoming that I've seen, and we thank the Wyoming State Law Library for putting this together, because that's really nice to have it available. There's also a collection at stateandlocalgovernment.net, which is helpful, and in addition to, it's not as broad as the collection that the Wyoming State Law Library has, but in addition to Wyoming, it also has state, it has other state information and links to other city and municipal codes for other states outside of Wyoming, and of course their cities within those states. So that has some good information at that website as well. I also had referred to international and foreign law earlier, so I thought this might be a good time to come in and take a look at a couple of these resources. I'm not going to do any big searches in here, but These are a couple of the main resources for looking for foreign and international law. This hg.org website gives us access to the individual states, and generally what we find here is it's pretty easy to find access to a constitution for a country and the statutes or statutory equivalents for foreign countries. Case law can be a little bit harder to find, but this website puts a lot of this information available at our fingertips. You can see also that they're, in many cases, linking to GlobalX. GlobalX was my other link on my page, and what that's doing is giving us, in most cases, a little essay about the government of the country with active links to where we can find some of the law for those countries. So that can be some helpful information as well. Where are you, Bermuda? Let's see you come up. There's law in Bermuda, and it gives us a report, law reports. It gives us some information about Bermuda and links to their websites. And that can be really helpful to have this information, and it tends to be a place that I send people who are looking for information. Let's see if I can get to the HG website just in general without going directly to their international law. You can see in this box right below law and practice that I'm pointing at now that I have access to U.S. courts, U.S. law, U.S. states law, then I have law worldwide, and then I start to have some international law organizations, European Union, United Nations, so I have access to some other international resources as well. HG tends to be the main resource when you're searching for information on the web. It's just a good international and foreign law portal. So I wanted to be sure and point that out to y'all because I think you will find some of this information here helpful for the occasional person who walks in and is looking for this kind of information. Well, we had some good luck getting through that content. So I'm wondering if we have any questions.
Great, thank you, Deb. And just a reminder, if you do have a mic or a phone, you may click that little icon of a hand with a green arrow to raise your hand, and I will unmute you and you can share the question with the group. Otherwise, if you do not see a chat box to type a question in, you should see in the upper right corner of your screen a little red rectangle with an arrow, and you can click that to pop out a chat text box, and you can type in a question that Deb will see and respond to. So we'll give folks just a moment on that.
While we're waiting, I just want to assure everyone again that the law libraries within your state are very happy to address any of these issues with you or to share resources with you. So if you have questions, please feel free to contact me or anybody at the University of Wyoming Law Library or the Wyoming State Law Library. We're happy to entertain your questions. And I also want to thank the Wyoming State Library for giving me the opportunity to present this information to you and to host us in the last 3 days.
You're very welcome, Deb. Let's see, just a question about the archive. Yes, the sessions, all 3 sessions will be archived. I will get those up on the State Library website either later today or tomorrow, Friday. But once that is up and I'm sure all the links are working, I will send an email out, not just to those of you who have attended, but to the entire Wyoming Library listserv, just so folks who did not participate live get an opportunity to view it at a later time. Okay, with that, it doesn't look like there's any other questions, so I think we will go ahead and conclude today. I want to thank Deb also for putting this together. I think it's been a great program, and do be sure to tell your coworkers about it who may not have had a chance to participate in the live sessions, because as some of you may know, we do while we don't keep the archives up in perpetuity, we do certainly keep them up on the State Library website for a good long while, so there'll be ample opportunity to view them at a later time. So thank you very much again, Deb, and I guess we'll go ahead and sign off for now.
Thanks very much. Everybody have a good day.